Hello everybody. Well, as you can see, I've come down to the coast today to have a look along the beach and the cliffs and the estuaries and see what we can find in nature, which is all along the coast. I just love to see the waves and hear the sound of them crashing and the patterns they make on the sand. And also, of course, when you walk along the sea strand, there's all sorts of things that you might find. So let's go and have a look and see what we can find. Well, here's something I've just found washed up by the tide. This is a skeleton of or part of the skeleton of a cuttlefish. These autumn seas really churn up the sand and the shingle, and you never know what you're going to find along the sea strand.
Well, I don't suppose many of us have ever seen a live cuttlefish. All we see is these skeletons washed up on the beach. But they're the most incredible creatures. Not only can they change their colour to camouflage themselves against predators and also to talk to each other, they use jet propulsion to get around, and one species grows to over 1 metre in length. Well, the Latin name for cuttlefish is Sepia officinalis. Well, how did they get that name? Well, back in 1758, the Swedish scientist Linnaeus gave them that name. Back in the days of the Greeks, they apparently discovered how to use the ink for drawing and painting. That's the ink that the cuttlefish ejects as a defence mechanism. And nowadays, artists know that as the reddish-brown colour sepia.
Oh, here's something a bit more sinister. This looks like a plastic bottle, but in fact it's a Portuguese man of war, jellyfish. And this sort of bottle-shaped area is actually its sail, and it's filled with various gases, including carbon monoxide, and it helps it get blown along the sea and quite widely distributed.
And here's a look at the tentacles, which can grow many metres in length, so do be wary if they get blown into your local seas in the summer. The tentacles have got stinging cells on them, and this is how they catch their prey as they float along.
Well, I've come to a lagoon which is sheltered from the sea by a shingle bank. And there's a lovely flock of about 300 Brent geese here, just sheltering from the wind. And a little bit further up the lagoon, there is at least 700 or 800 more Brent geese out on the water. And they're sharing the water with quite a few other species. There's a couple of egrets here. There are redshank, shelduck, widgeon, that whistling noise that you might be able to hear. So there's quite a population of birds sheltering and feeding in the shallow water here. It's partly seawater, partly brackish water, and partly more fresh water, and the swans certainly tend to move up and down depending on the food, whether it's in more brackish water or in fresh water. And as I look out across the water here at these Brent geese, happily I can see quite a few that don't have that white mark on their necks, so they're the youngsters of the year, so looks like they've had at least a reasonable breeding season up in the north. And this is nice. There's a little pool here on the edge of the lagoon, and there goes a little egret. You can quite clearly see his yellow legs, his yellow feet rather, on his black legs. Until a few years ago you'd be very unlikely to see egrets of any sort, because they're really a bird that you'd expect to find south of the Sahara, or in North Africa at least, or possibly in the south of France. But one of the good things about the way the climate has been changing is that the milder weather has brought egrets over here, and the little egret has been an increasingly common feature for some years now. But we're also now seeing more great white egrets, and even the little cattle egret. Egrets are part of the heron family, and they're really becoming quite tame, and you can see them in all sorts of places. And here's another nice wader here, you can just see there. This is the oyster catcher, with black and white plumage in this long orange beak. A very vocal creature this, and again quite catholic in its tastes. You often see it on salt marshes, or here it's along the shingle edge, or on wet grazing pastures. This egret is paddling around in the shadows. Just coming around very gently to see if I can give you a better view of the redshank and the egret feeding in the shallows. But I don't want to disturb them. It's so important when you're looking at these birds not to disturb them, because they need every minute of the day to feed, to get them through the winter. So I'm having to be very cautious. Well, some walkers went past and scared the egret off, but he's obviously got some good feeding here, because I can now see him again. He's come back to the same place. Hopefully you can just see him there paddling around in the shadows, and every now and then he jumps up and rushes along and grabs at something that he's seen with his sharp eyes. Obviously a peaceful scene with the gentle sound of the geese just chattering to each other, and the occasional shrill piping of that redshank, warning everybody of danger, or not danger as the case may be. And a few people walking around enjoying the sounds and sights of nature. Well, down here on the seashore, of course, there's all sorts of things to be found, and we've just seen a pied wagtail flitting around amongst the seaweeds looking for little flies and things which are creeping around in the seaweed. And well, rock pooling, of course, is a great activity to do with the children, and there's all sorts of things you can find hidden under the rocks. There's a whelk shell here stuck to a stone, but just always remember to put the rocks back when you've finished, to give them the cover that they need. And also remember, rocks can be very slippery. It's easy to think that these whelks and shells and barnacles and sea anemones are all just inert sitting on the rocks, but actually research has shown that there's quite a lot of competition that goes on, and a lot of fighting for places to be the first to catch the high tide, for example, or even the low tide. So there's a whole world going on down here that sometimes we're not really aware of. You also have to be aware when you're rock pooling that the tide might be coming in, and I just got wet feet then because I forgot that the tide was just gently coming in. And the ubiquitous crows, of course, are finding plenty to get their beaks round down here. Quite often we rather dismiss crows as being rather destructive animals and killing young birds and taking eggs and so forth, but here they are down on the seashore making use of a resource, and they're such adaptable birds, and that's why they're so numerous. Balance that against the Brent geese that we were just talking about, who are really quite restricted in their diet, and then when the eelgrass went through such a big decline in the 20th century, population numbers crashed until they managed to find an alternative source of food. So it's these adaptable, wide-ranging species that can turn their hand or their beak to any sort of food that become more common. Well, I'm just looking up on the cliffs here, and you might just be able to see little white dots, and here's one flying in, and these are fulmars. Fulmars are quite different. If you look carefully, they've got very stiff, straight, outstretched wings, and apparently this was the inspiration for the design of the Spitfire fighter plane in the Second World War. Fulmars nest along the cliffs, and they do have quite a nasty defence mechanism, which is if you get too close they'll spit a nasty oily fluid at you if they think you're a predator. And I have been the subject of that once when I got too close, but then that serves me right. Well, we've had an incredible storm recently, and there's a few things being washed up which I haven't seen for a long time. One of the saddest is this beautiful bottlenose dolphin. Its teeth are just incredible, hundreds and hundreds of them, and we don't know what killed it, but here it is, and a chance to get a closer look at this beautiful marine mammal. And now here's something else that I don't think I've ever seen washed up on the shore, and that's a gannet. Without a question, my favourite bird. Look at this incredible beak, really, really sharp. When they're alive, gannets are the most beautiful white colour with black wingtips and a bright yellow patch around their beak. They nest up on the cliffs of Scotland, and I remember when I was younger camping right up on the edge of the cliff in the Western Isles and watching these marvellous birds diving down to catch fish underwater. Well, I thought we'd end this visit to the coast by coming down at dusk and watching one of the marvellous sights of the autumn and winter, and that's the gathering flocks or murmurations of starlings as they come in to roost in the reed beds. They make an absolutely incredible sight as they wheel and turn in the air, sometimes looking like smoke, at other times like an amoeba that we used to see at the end of a microscope at school. Apparently each bird follows 7 others, and so they're all able to turn at once, or appear to be turning at once, and fly in perfect formation. There aren't really that many of them in this flock that you can see, because over the last decade or so starling numbers have fallen quite dramatically, but still they make a marvellous sight. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this visit to the various different parts of the coast that we can see, and hopefully it will bring some relief from the rather dreary days of winter. Cheerio.